Good evening, everyone. My name is Catherine Castleman. I'm the president of Sound Rivers, and I'm so thrilled to be here tonight with you all to be listening to this presentation. We're going to hear and learn about Partners for Environmental Justice's community watershed engagement. And I am very excited to introduce our speaker tonight, Amin Davis. Just a quick reminder before I introduce Amin to make sure that you keep yourself muted and check your mics periodically. You're welcome to use the chat at any time to ask questions, and we'll have some time at the end for a Q&A that Vail is going to help to moderate. And this will be recorded, so you'll be able to see this presentation later if you want to come back to it. Amin Davis is an environmental scientist and board member of Partners for Environmental Justice, a board-led organization that's based in Raleigh, which originated in the mid-1990s to address flooding events that were associated with Walnut Creek. And Amin got his BS degree in marine and environmental science from Hampton University and a Master of Zoology degree from NC State. We were talking about how to pronounce zoology earlier. And now has more than 22 years of professional experience conducting environmental and water resource management work in the public, private, and nonprofit sectors across the Southeast and Mid-Atlantic regions. He's worked for the NC Department of Environmental Quality since 2008, and he's currently a grant manager of the Water Resources Development Grant Program, which is administered by the Division of Water Resources. He also co-leads the Walnut Creek Watershed Action Team and spearheaded the creation of the Walnut Creek Watershed Learning Network for Partners for Environmental Justice, which seeks to empower historically underserved communities in Southeast Raleigh. So I'm going to turn it over to Amin now. Again, please feel free to ask questions in the chat as we go along. We'll have some time at the end for a Q&A. So take it away, Amin.
Well, thank you, Catherine, for the introduction, and good evening, everyone. I'd like to thank Sound Rivers Executive Director Heather Deck for inviting me to speak to you all this evening. I'm a huge fan of Sound Rivers and have admired the boots on the ground advocacy for our watersheds that they've been doing for several decades now. In fact, I was an active volunteer with the Neuse River Keeper Foundation and volunteer for the Muddy Water Watch from 2007 to 2009. So this is just a little bit about a little bit about myself, and really the most important thing is that I've had a lifelong passion for the protection of natural and particularly water resources. I've developed more recently a passion for kind of the improvement of human communities through the integration of nature-based and equitable solutions that I will talk about over the next 25 to 30 minutes. So with that, we'll get started. And these are just some things I'm going to talk about. I'm going to just define what environmental justice is, talk about PEJ's past environmental justice advocacy, as well as our current advocacy. I'm gonna leave you all with some getting involved resources, and then hopefully we'll have time for Q&A after. I will warn you that there are a lot of slides, so I'm gonna have to run through them quickly. Many of them are visuals and graphics for context, so hopefully this will be more of an interactive journey than a boring presentation. And there will be a PDF of this presentation made available so you can view it afterwards. So don't worry about trying to feverishly take notes. Just want to get started by kind of defining what environmental injustice and environmental justice is and what they are. So environmental justice or injustice is a persistent and equitable distribution of pollution and other environmental burdens on low-income communities and communities of color. I'd also like to highlight what's in red, that environmental injustices exist because there are many, essentially, agencies and organizations in positions of power that unfortunately have discriminatory practices and policies in place. So environmental justice really is involving the meaningful, or includes the meaningful involvement of all people. And I like this NC Environmental Justice Network graphic that basically it colorfully illustrates the point that if you're not at the table, then you're on the menu. And a lot of our communities suffer from being dumped on, neglected, and so on and so forth. So this timeline, this is a historical timeline of the history of the Rochester Heights community in which PEJ was formed. And this talk is mainly going to focus on the creation of Partners for Environmental Justice in 1997. It started out as Episcopalians for Environmental Justice and changed to PEJ in 97. PEJ published a document called PEJ: A History, in which they talk about the Walnut Creek watershed. And then in 2017, the Division of Water Resources, we started the Walnut Creek Watershed Action Team. So Rochester Heights is one of the first African-American subdivisions in the city of Raleigh. PEJ was formed, the houses, let me back up. The houses in Rochester Heights were first built around 1957. PEJ formed from meetings at St. Ambrose Episcopal Church, located in Rochester Heights, to address perceived environmental injustices that this community was experiencing. A 2004 historical document PEJ published that I mentioned earlier specifically mentioned the Walnut Creek watershed, as well as how this community had been receiving stormwater runoff and floodwaters from upstream portions of the watershed and Cary, from the town of Cary and city of Raleigh. And as I mentioned, PEJ was involved with the creation of the Walnut Creek Watershed Action Team in 2017, which is a watershed-wide initiative to holistically and equitably improve conditions in this degraded watershed. So this is a map of the watershed. The watershed is outlined in blue. Watershed is basically the land area where water flows to a major water body. And in this case, that would be Walnut Creek, which is shown as the light blue line in the middle of the watershed. From a flooding and stormwater perspective, a watershed is a water community. So all of the rain and water that would fall in this area, if it's not used or evaporated, it is going to eventually make its way into Walnut Creek. The other thing I'd like to point out is Rochester Heights is highlighted in the yellow and in the red shape, and the hatch line in the middle of the map represents essentially half of the drainage area of Walnut Creek, which is 46 square miles, drains to Rochester Heights. So 23 square mile, Rochester Heights receives 23 square miles of drainage and stormwater flow from upstream in the watershed. You can also see that Rochester Heights is located just south of downtown Raleigh up here. So this is kind of a demographic setting. This is a 2010 watershed census map that shows a relative percentage of African-American population broken into census blocks, with the light colors showing a low relative percentage and the dark colors showing a high relative percentage of African-American population. You can see how drastically the watershed demographics change from upstream here in the town of Cary, and as you go south and east through Raleigh and into southeast Raleigh right here. The Rochester Heights census block was 98.5% African-American back in 2010. However, those the demographics of this community and all over downtown Raleigh is rapidly changing. So this is kind of a landscape. This is a digital elevation model of the watershed that shows the areas of highest elevation upstream in green and the areas of lowest elevation downstream in blue. And you can see that Rochester Heights is located in the area of lower elevation in the watershed. This basically shows how the Rochester Heights is bounded in this red area. A significant portion of it is still in the FEMA floodplain, and there's a tributary that runs north towards Walnut Creek that also has been a source of flooding for this community over the years. This is, if you recall from the historical timeline I showed earlier, I had noted back in the 70s, the Corps of Engineers had conducted a flood study in Rochester Heights in the early 70s, and then a follow-up flood study in the mid-1980s. The image on the left is a 1986 letter from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, Wilmington District, to the City of Raleigh city manager. There were two findings from this letter. The first finding is that the Corps of Engineers said they were not able to identify any economically feasible flood mitigation measures as part of their flood study. Secondly, they found no significant change in development from the early 1970s to the mid-1980s. You can come to your own conclusions about whether you believe this is true based on the next 4 slides I'm going to show. I did want to point out that the image on the right here is a newspaper article from 1997, which talked about how the Raleigh City Council had rejected a proposal for the city to pay the costs of drainage improvements in Rochester Heights. Instead, they decided to charge the residents $1,150 per household when they, in other areas of the city, they had not charged residents for drainage improvements at that time. So more on that in some other slides. So this is a 1974 aerial photograph of the watershed with Walnut Creek starting here and Rochester Heights here. So the next slide I'm going to show, so just take a look at the difference. Essentially, the dark areas are areas that are relatively undeveloped lands, and these lighter areas are areas that are highly developed. So just take a look at this, and then this is a 1988 aerial photo of the same area. So you can see from 1974 to 1988, there's a huge amount of development in the watershed, including Interstate 40 here. So the next slide I'm going to show is zoomed into the Rochester Heights community. So 1974, you can see there's a lot of, there is development, but there's also a lot of undeveloped darker areas in this image. And then fast forward to 1988, and you see just the significant difference in development. You can also see that Interstate 40 was constructed and bisected Rochester Heights on the top from Biltmore Hills, which is another historic African-American community to the south here. So just ask, this is a rhetorical question, but I think it's pretty obvious that there was a significant change in development from the 70s to the 1980s, even though the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers did not find that to be the case for whatever reason. So PEJ was formed again to address flooding, trash dumping, and ecosystem degradation through flood reduction measures, trash removal, cleanups, and then restoration, ecological restoration. The image on the left is the cover page of PEJ's vision document, which they called the Walnut Creek 2000 plan. This plan of action had 2 primary objectives. Number one, to implement extensive community outreach and education about the issues going on in this community. And second, they had a vision to create an urban wetland education park. So the image on the lower right is actually a conceptual master plan of an urban wetland destination park, which today is named the Walnut Creek Wetland Park. This master plan was commissioned by PEJ and created in 2002 by an NC State College of Design students and overseen by their professor, Dr. Robin Moore, who is still teaching at the university. So with any significant movement any significant movement for change is led by visionary, passionate, and tireless leaders that are skilled at effective communication. So PEJs, these next photos are going to feature PEJ's visionary leaders. At the top left, the late Dr. Norman Camp, who is a member of St. Ambrose Church and a longtime PEJ chairman. And on the right, a gentleman named Reverend Ed Milligan, who was at the time PEJ's assistant chairman. On the top right is the late Ross Andrews. He was a board member, and he was actually the first director of the Walnut Creek Wetland Park, he unfortunately passed away suddenly in 2013. But he organized and coordinated early stream cleanups and the tree plantings in the area. Ross actually invited me to be a crew leader for one of these cleanups back in 2001. And this is how I first became engaged with PEJ's work. And this bottom photo is Dr. Camp speaking to a school group, and he tirelessly talked to school groups, city council, community organizations, and anyone who would listen about the environmental injustices and PEJ's vision to address them. I'll also note that all three of these photos were taken in the fellowship hall at St. Ambrose Church, which kind of served as ground zero for PEJ back in its earlier days. So the image on the left is a flyer from a 1998 community meeting. The image on the right is a 2000 community cleanup flyer. So essentially cleanups would start, again, this is the fellowship hall of St. Ambrose Church. Ross and Dr. Camp would essentially, they would give a pep talk about what was going on and their vision. They'd assign teams, and then they would go out into the wetlands and adjacent areas to clean up to clean up trash and other things. These spring and fall cleanups are now part of Wake County's Big Sweep, which is a program led by Wake Soil and Water Conservation District. The community cleanups and plantings were at the core of PEJ's community outreach and engagement. The upper left photo is a 2006 cleanup with Ross Andrews pushing a tire out of the wetland. This photo here is of 2001 planting of a legacy garden right next to the area where the wetland center is now. The bottom photo is actually, there's an arrow, that's actually me planting with two siblings who essentially show up at, oops, I think I jumped ahead. Yeah, these two were brother and sister. They would show up at pretty much all of the cleanups. And I ran into their mom last year after not seeing any of them for over 15 years. Mom said that they're both doing well. They're all grown up and doing well. So, and then the bottom photo is just a photo of, trash cleaned up from the adjacent wetlands over here. So you can see that there was a lot of effort put into cleaning up this area over the years. So essentially, as you may recall, PEJ envisioned the creation of the urban wetland destination park back in their 1998 vision document. These pictures show kind of their vision from then becoming a reality in 10 years later. The photo on the left is a groundbreaking ceremony. A lot of these folks, the arrows from left to right, that's Dr. Norman Camp, former City of Raleigh Mayor Charles Meeker, and Dr. Robin Moore, who helped to create the conceptual master plan for the park. On the right, you see Mayor Meeker and Dr. Camp. This was the dedication in September 2009 of the Wetland Education Center, which incidentally was renamed in 2018 to the Dr. Norman and Betty Camp Wetland Education Center in honor of Dr. Camp and all of his advocacy and work with PEJ in the community. So these are just a list of partners broken up into faith-based organizations, governments, grants, and nonprofits, private schools. But this is, the question was asked at a presentation I've given before: how do you grow a collaborative and equitable approach for a watershed? Well, that's done through visionary leaders and collaborative partnerships with faith-based government, nonprofit, educational, and funding organizations like those shown on this list. I would also like to recognize the City of Raleigh water quality staff and parks and recreation colleagues who have made a concerted effort to help improve historic watershed inequity along Walnut Creek that the city had been blamed for not addressing in the past. So I'm coming towards the end of this presentation, and this is kind of the how you can become engaged in community watershed engagement. One of the things I'll mention is we're really promoting this concept called equitable development, which is kind of a way to address environmental justices that goes beyond just environmentally related things. So it's an approach for meeting the needs of underserved communities through policies and programs that reduce disparities while fostering places that are healthy and vibrant, not just for those who are wealthy or well off, but for all people of all communities. So one thing you can do is you can learn about and promote equitable development policies and frameworks. So the left graphic is, if any of you have heard, this is more relevant in more urbanized areas, but there's Congress has come up with something called opportunity zones, which are supposed to encourage long-term investments in low-income and urban and rural communities throughout the country. However, I've heard from different planners who work throughout the United States that these opportunity zones may not be meeting the needs of underserved communities. Instead, have become opportunity zones for gentrification and the displacement of lower income communities and communities of color. The graphic on the right is created by a local nonprofit in Southeast Raleigh called Southeast Raleigh Promise, and it promotes this principle of revitalization without displacement, where you strike a balance between revitalizing and improving communities, but not displacing people. So Southeast Raleigh Promise has created this innovative development called in Southeast Raleigh called the Beacon Site. It currently consists of a YMCA, an elementary school, and an affordable housing community on the property of a former flea market site. They also have future plans to include construction of spaces for business incubators, workforce development training, and other career training pathways. So, again, this was located in a traditionally underserved area of Raleigh along the Rock Quarry Corridor. And you can see the intentionality of the revitalization, but also helping to improve the community without displacing its residents. All right, so I just want to discuss briefly how PEJ, we have gotten involved in advocating, doing advocacy for rezoning projects. And the reason why we've done this is that the rezoning process can be the best opportunity to advocate for equitable development concessions, such as low impact development for new development and the integration of green stormwater infrastructure, as well as non-environmental benefits such as affordable housing, workforce development that supports green jobs, small business enterprises, et cetera. So PEJ was involved in the rezoning for the Downtown South project. Some of you may have heard it was designed to house a Major League Soccer stadium. Since then, I think the developers have scaled back and they're saying it might be just an entertainment center. But that would be the hub with residential and commercial development adjacent. So this is the largest planned development in the city of Raleigh's history, and it involves the largest developer in the city of Raleigh. The developer did a very poor job with community engagement during the rezoning process, and it was a very controversial project. In fact, the city's planning commission voted 8-0 to reject the rezoning proposal. However, the city council, Raleigh City Council, voted 7-1 in favor of it. So these are just requests and recommendations that we made. We actually had meetings with city planning commission, city council, and the developer requesting these things. And we didn't get some of the other community benefits that us and other organizations had lobbied for, but we were able to get above and beyond stormwater mitigation put into the rezoning conditions that will apply for all stages of development here to protect the downstream communities, including Rochester Heights, from increased flooding due to this large development. Rochester Heights, incidentally, is located less than a mile downstream of this proposed development. So in addition to the stormwater mitigation, the developer agreed to put up to $2.5 million into what's called the Walnut Creek Corridor Fund. Those funds could go towards grant applications and cover the matching contributions of grant applications for watershed improvement projects, not just at this site, but anywhere within the Walnut Creek watershed. These rezoning conditions also set up what's called the Walnut Creek Stakeholder Group, which is a group of citizens, many of which are in the most flood-prone communities in the watershed, as well as a developer and PEJ. And we're planning our kickoff meeting for the stakeholder group next month. And I'm about to wrap up. I'm not sure how much time because I meant to hit my timer, but it's stuck. So can somebody give me, how much time do I have? Can somebody just let me know?
You can go on for another 10 minutes if you like. 10,
oh,
15.
I'll be finished. I will take much less than 10 minutes. That's good.
Okay.
All right. So thank you. So another thing that, that can help with, this advocacy is promoting green infrastructure, learning about and promoting it. Green infrastructure can be viewed as the environmental component of the equitable development framework. So as I mentioned earlier, equitable development includes environmental considerations, also economic and social. But green infrastructure really speaks to the environmental, but it also speaks to many of the non-environmental benefits that can be derived through these. So the image on the upper left is actually a City of Raleigh infographic that is probably my favorite example of showing folks what this actually looks like in development. The image on the upper right is proposed, examples of where green infrastructure practices such as bioswales, which are rain gardens and things, could be integrated into a park. This photo on the bottom left is an affordable housing community that intentionally incorporated green infrastructure in Minneapolis, Minnesota. So you can see this is a constructed wetland. Here's the affordable housing community. They even put signage in front of the constructed wetland that could promote environmental education and stewardship as to why that is there. And then the image on the bottom right is the Low Impact Development Guidebook for North Carolina, which aims to minimize impacts to land, water, and air while reducing infrastructure and maintenance costs and increasing marketability. So they basically, low impact development really is an approach not just for stormwater, but it's very relevant if you're dealing with a site that is currently undeveloped and wooded, and there's going to be clearing and construction. So they have 5 principles for what essentially makes up low impact development. So, and then this really hits the why low impact development and GSI are important. It hits the community benefits that these practices provide. So for instance, managing floods, that's an environmental benefit. Green jobs, that's an economic benefit. Education, that's a social benefit. And then air quality, preserving green spaces and integrating green spaces into areas that are developed can help to maintain ambient air quality. And as climate change continues to progress, that obviously is significant. This image on the right really speaks to community health. And oops, let's see here. So this really shows how the built environment and the natural environment go a long way to determining whether our communities and neighborhoods are going to be healthy or not based on how they are developed and how they are treated. So I'm about to close out. So this is the Walnut Creek Watershed Learning Network. We started this in 2020, last year, and what just is highlighted kind of highlights the three primary objectives of the what we call the WLN. Number one, educating participants about various topics such as stormwater management, green infrastructure, and environmental justice, making connections about why these topics are important to them and their communities, and providing participants with the resources to become more engaged stakeholders and be empowered to take action in protecting the integrity of their communities. So, you know, the overview, this was inspired by great innovative work being done in Atlanta through the Atlanta Watershed Learning Network. I won't read through all this. I'll just give you a second to just take all of this in. And this is the website for the WLN on PEJ's website that has more information about it. I will say that we had 10 graduates in our spring. Our spring session was online and virtual. Our fall version, which started in or ended in November, was in person and was held at the Walnut Creek Wetland Center. So my last two slides, these are just, I'm not going to read through them because you all, number one, for the sake of time, so that I can try and address any questions you may have. And this information will be in the PDF document that you have. But these are basically recommendations and resources for getting involved with community watershed engagement. And then so this first slide are recommendations. And the second slide contains a list of websites for learning more about you know, the multiple community benefits associated with equitable development, environmental justice, and green stormwater infrastructure. So with that, I think my contact information is up in the upper left, but I will suggest that you might get a more timely response by reaching out to our part-time community engagement director, Reverend Don Singletary, or our program director, Renee Nez. So with that, that's all I have. I want to thank you for your time and attention. I hope this information has been helpful in some way. And I look forward to hearing from some of you during our Q&A session.
Thank you so much, Amin. That was fascinating. And thank you for all the good work you've been doing over the last years, many years of work. So at this point, we are going to have some questions. If you want to come off mute, you can go ahead and unmute and ask a question, or you can type them in the chat. Don't be shy.
I mean, I have a question. As far as that big development in Raleigh, did the city council, the members of the city council who voted for it against the recommendations of the planning board, did they give any reasoning for that?
Yeah, they kind of did. I think that they looked at it as just, and I'm just going off of memory. If anybody were interested, I think they provide links to the public meeting. The public meeting where they made where city council made the decision to approve this was very, very interesting, very heated on both sides. But they basically thought that the benefits of this project, particularly to, you know, a traditionally underserved area on the edge of Southeast Raleigh. It's not really in Southeast Raleigh, it's right on the edge of Southeast Raleigh. They thought the benefits far outweighed the opposition to the project. And yeah, so Yeah.
Heather has actually, she's asked in the chat, what's the status of the project? Do they have all their permits?
So they have submitted their development plans to the city. This development is gonna go over the course of 15 to 20 years. So they have submitted their overall site plan and their first kind of large development plans to the city of Raleigh, who are reviewing, from what I know, they're currently reviewing it. And we are, when I say we, PEJ is been meeting with them monthly in preparation for the stakeholder group meeting, and we're going to have our kickoff meeting next month. And the stakeholder group is going to kind of decide. The funds aren't going to be put into the corridor fund for another 2.5 years, according to the rezoning conditions. But we're excited to kind of get our stakeholder group together, and hopefully, as the developments progress over time, we can use that the money that the developer is going to put in towards applying for grants to do watershed improvement projects. And I'll let Kevin, if you want to add anything in terms of the status of this development, feel free.
Thank you, Amin. For everyone's benefit, I am with the City of Raleigh Stormwater Management Division. Although I retired January 1st, I started back part-time February 21st. And I mean, it's amazing how much institutional memory one loses in 7 weeks of full retirement. It's not just my memory. It's that I'm not directly involved in the development review process. So I'm just not up to speed on that. However, I will be attending the next meeting on behalf of my boss of the group that is charged with dispensing, if that's the right word, of the fund that's been created. But I mean, I really am not up on the status of the development plan or plan approvals.
Thanks, Kevin.
While I, if I may, while I sort of have the mic, what I have been doing for the last 10 years or so with the City of Raleigh, in part, is strongly advocating for the use of green stormwater infrastructure, sometimes referred to by other names such as low impact development. And we recently updated our implementation plan, approved and endorsed by City Council in July. The plan, the narrative part of the plan, has lots and lots of links. We're very intentional about that to make it, concise for reading, but yet useful as a resource. If you find it useful, I'd be glad to copy it into the chat for folks to take a look at their leisure.
We would love to see that, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, and I'll just say, Kevin's been a great colleague and friend over the years, and he's done a lot to kind of move GSI forward within, the city of Raleigh. He does it very quietly, but you're beginning to really bear fruit in that, if you drive around certain areas of Raleigh, they're actually doing their own projects, GSI projects in various parts of the city, including several around the Walnut Creek Wetland Park.
Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate that. But also, Amin mentioned those who are hardworking visionaries over the years, and by all means, Amin Davis belongs in that significant group of contributors, and in fact, was recognized for that work and that role with the City of Raleigh award within the last year. So appreciate it a lot. Amin.
Thanks, Kevin.
Thank you. Are there other questions from the audience? If not, I have one more.
I do have another one.
You do? Go ahead.
Well, when it comes to the green stormwater infrastructure projects, where do you see the most resistance against those?
I would say that developers tend to say that it's too costly, or because a lot of them aren't used to doing it. I think really the key is, the earlier you can get in the process, and that's why rezoning cases are good if you can, negotiate or advocate and explain exactly why it would be important to do this in this particular area. In my experience, there hasn't been a lot of resistance, honestly, as long as we get in early. We haven't really faced a lot of resistance, and we're beginning to, different communities or people are beginning to reach out to us about rezonings, and we have there are at least 4 active rezonings we're involved in within the Walnut Creek watershed right now. And, we're having pretty good success with, making the case for it. So I think that Kevin could probably speak more to the more common resistance, because honestly, PEJ, we really haven't faced a lot of resistance for developers. And even outside of PEJ, a couple that I've been involved in, they've been willing to do it, particularly when you make developers aware that there's grant funding to help support those above and beyond measures.
I'll agree with everything that Amin said. I don't know that there's necessarily resistance. There's just maybe less enthusiasm than we would like. What you'll see if you take a look at our updated GSI plan, that the theme and a big part of the push is for the city of Raleigh to lead by example, and not just leave it to the private sector to do what we say is good. We would like for them to do what we do that's good. And if there has been vocal resistance, I would say it's resistance to change within our own organization. That's we're working on that. We are. You'll see in the plan that we have developed an internal policy whereby GSI needs to at least be considered on every project that disturbs the land that's more than $500,000 of city investment, which is most of our capital improvement projects. It's about to be launched. It's not in place yet. It'll probably take a year or so for it to really, the policy to break in. We have a number of tools for our project managers and consultant project managers to work with, including a GSI cost tool. So we're getting very, very heavily invested. The city can't really require GSI, although there was some consideration of that a few years ago. So there's not really resistance. We're trying to bring along a bandwagon of support, including from the state. And let's also remember that the state is a developer and an owner and operates and owns land facilities, as is the city of Raleigh. We're not just a regulator of other developers' activities.
Yeah. And I think also we've actually had some good conversations regarding integrating GSI into affordable housing communities. So we've had meetings with Wake County's Habitat for Humanity. Wake County has another group that promotes and is doing some affordable housing within Wake County. And we have a meeting set up with another municipality within the Walnut Creek watershed in early May they are actually promoting a small affordable housing development. And, we're going to meet with them to try to share with them, why GSI would be a good option. So I think more of it is just that it's not commonly done versus that there's resistance. And I think the more GSI becomes standard and folks are able to clearly articulate the benefits of it, I think it will just continue to grow because there's lots of, funding available to make it happen. And there's lots of reasons. I mean, there's just lots of reasons to do it, even outside of the environmental benefits.
Right. That actually ties into our next question from Heather, which is the Walnut Creek watershed area / communities receiving any state budget funds for resilience or stormwater or any federal ARPA funds for stormwater infrastructure, et cetera?
There is a lot of, there's a significant amount of ARPA funding that's being channeled into different agencies within the state. I know that the North Carolina Office of Resilience and Recovery, or NCORE, they are kind of like set up to be one of the central depots for a lot of that funding. Emergency management has a lot of funding. The North Carolina Land and Water Fund, formerly known as the Clean Water Management Trust Fund, is actually in the process of establishing a separate grant just for flood resiliency projects. They were allocated a one-time distribution of $15 million to do that. So my program, the Water Resource Development Grant, we haven't received any of that funding, but there are other organizations, and I actually have a slide that was prepared by Land and Water Fund that kind of gave a nice summary of the different funding amounts and entities that were, I guess, administering those funds. So I'd be happy to email that to you, Vale, and for distribution. So yes, there is a lot of state funds coming in for kind of resiliency, flood resiliency, and things of that could tie into GSI. But my agency has not, like Division of Water Resources, has not seen any of that funding. Kevin, you can probably speak to on the municipal level if kind of how those funds are, the status of the ARPA and things like that.
Yes, I can somewhat. I'm not thoroughly familiar with it, but there a certain amount of the ARPA funds have already been directed to the city of Raleigh for certain designated but discretionary uses on our part. And we are still sorting out how we will use those funds. On our list of priorities is at least one park or stormwater and stream restoration project in a park in the Walnut Creek watershed. I mean, I think you're aware of which one that is. Since it's so preliminary, I won't name it here. There are other funds that are available statewide to be distributed on a competitive basis based on a priority system that the Division of Water Infrastructure is now developing to be advertised for applications due September 20th, I believe. It's still a work in progress. We have in mind a project or two for which we might apply when that comes around. However, those funds probably will be reserved for communities in greater need of the funds, and the city of Raleigh might not even qualify to apply for those funds. We're doing too well economically, perhaps, to be eligible to apply.
Any other last questions from the audience? If not, I might ask one. Feel free to keep putting them in the chat. So my question is, we have a lot of people here from other parts of the state. What are some spaces that they might be watching on a local level to pay attention to some of these, planning and zoning decisions, and maybe try to model a little bit off of what the Watershed Learning Network is doing in other parts of the state? Do you have any recommendations for how folks might stay engaged or learn about some of those planning processes or policy making processes that are happening elsewhere?
Yeah, I would say, it's hard to say like who, if they're like organizations that are kind of doing similar work. If there are, then definitely plug into those. But even if not, getting engaged in rezoning, learning about every planning, every municipality has some semblance of like a planning agency. So, kind of maybe just getting familiar with the rezoning process in your particular location, what may be good. Additionally, but even before doing that, I'd recommend, and this was kind of touched on in the last two slides I showed, just learning a little bit about, equitable development and GSI and the benefits they provide, so that you can engage and offer, maybe offer some things that typically haven't been thought about in these processes. And like the Downtown South project, it kind of brought to light so many inequitable things that just should be part of the process, but aren't. So it really one of the good outcomes of that whole process was that it really helped the city to think about, particularly the planning group, about ways to improve their processes to make them more equitable. And there's I think in one of the web links I have, there's something called an Equitable Development Scorecard. And it's kind of like a list of things to, if a development comes into town or whatever, kind of a checklist of things that you could go to a planning commission or a zoning commission and say, hey, has this been considered? And maybe even move towards having them adopt something like that. And that's something that we're thinking about moving forward as well.
Thank you. That's such a great model. I think we have a lot to learn from what you've set up in Raleigh, and hopefully it'll expand to other parts of the state. I know we have to wrap up, so thank you so much again, Amin Davis, for being with us tonight. I'll just mention a few quick things as we wrap up. So Sound Rivers is going through our April match campaign right now. So if you feel moved to continue to support this work and the work of our partners, please do contribute. You can go to soundrivers.org. Every dollar in April is actually going to be matched up to 30,000, which is an amazing gift, and we're excited about that. So please head to soundrivers.org, see how you can get involved. There's lots of upcoming events. We're excited to be doing a few more in-person events this summer, and so stay tuned for that. And next month's Tell Me About It Tuesday's guest is Dr. Stephen Moisey, who's the director of ECU's Water Resources Center and a professor of geological sciences. He'll be talking about the Coastlines and People project. So we hope you'll join us for that as well. And yes, Heather made another plug there, soundrivers.org, for more information for our upcoming events, to join and to donate. And we're so grateful for you all taking the time to be here. And thanks again to Amin Davis.
You're welcome. And thank you all for what you do, Sound Rivers. And yeah, keep doing it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Amin.
Take care. Good night.
That was great.